boss, I want to be the best player in the world. Will you help me? Like, just to have that desire, that foresight, that goal, that confidence as an 18-year-old kid says everything you need to know about Cristiano Ronaldo.
Welcome to Connecting for Future, your podcast for beyond connectivity. And now, your host, Christian Kosling.
Welcome to Connecting for Future, the podcast where we explore the game-changing ideas shaping the future of business, technology, and leadership. I'm your host, Christian, and today we have an incredible guest, former Premier League footballer, or I would say soccer, and keynote speaker, Paul McVeigh. Paul, welcome to the show.
Great to meet you, Christian, and I think we've already gone off on a little bit of the wrong foot when I'm calling it football and you call it soccer. And even in German, I don't know any Germans who call football soccer. So we have to understand, why do you do that?
So I spent a lot of time in Canada, and they just like, whenever I said football, they had like a huge misunderstanding. Why? So it's always soccer.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? I work with companies all over the world, and depending on where I'm working, whether it's in North America, US, Canada, or whether I'm in Singapore or sometimes in the Middle East, you have to call it soccer, whereas everywhere else in the world, it's always football.
Paul, before we dive into today's conversation, can you share a little bit about your journey from playing at the highest level in football, now I say football, to now working with business leaders? What's the story behind that transition?
Well, I'm glad that you told me that we have about 35 minutes today. And with that question, that could probably take up all 35 minutes. So I feel like I'll need to keep this brief, because trying to condense 31 years of my career into a few lines is very tricky, especially being an Irish guy, because it normally takes me 20 minutes just to say hello, being Irish. So to try and tell you my life story in a few minutes is challenging, but I will try my best. So I was brought up in Belfast in Ireland, and it was a really unique upbringing, because we were very fortunate that we managed to, go to school and then come back from school and essentially just play football all day long. And it was really amazing just to be able to play with your friends in the street and do something that you love doing. And there were, 50, 60 kids all playing in the street. It was a really, really amazing time. But of course, this is against the backdrop of being brought up in a war zone. There was a civil war happening with the IRA and the British government. So always things happening around you, and you could hear constantly, trouble going off, whether it was, shootings or bombs going off or whatever it was that you could hear in the background as you were playing football, and everyone would stop for a minute and then carry on playing football. But that was my life growing up for 16 years. And I was very fortunate that I was scouted playing for a local boys team. And I was brought across to start a 2-year youth team contract at Tottenham Hotspur, which was amazing because I got to meet on my first day one of your compatriots in Jurgen Klinsmann, and that was just amazing to be able to go from one day playing with my friends in the streets of Belfast to the next day starting my first day at Tottenham Hotspur in 1994, and this World Cup winner, this absolute superstar, was training with me, or more correctly, I was training with him. And that was the start of the career that went on and allowed me and exposed me to world-class performers, because even our manager at the time was an Argentinian World Cup winner in Ozzy Ardiles. And I was very, very fortunate to make my debut at Spurs. And when I scored on my home debut in the Premier League, and I played up front with an amazing striker called Teddy Sheringham, who won the treble with Manchester United. In our defence that day, we had Sol Campbell, who became an invincible with Arsenal when they won the league without losing a game all season. And it was just an amazing experience. And then to do that for nearly 20 years was a real privilege, a real joy. And when I stopped playing in 2010, I just had always loved this subject, the content, all of the things around mindset and psychology. And of course, how much it benefited me. And then I wanted to share the insights and experience that I'd learned with the corporate world. And this is why I've been keynote speaking for companies all over the world.
Drop some names. It's like Microsoft and all the big ones, right? So they are You've did like keynotes for almost all the big tech companies.
It feels incredible because I sometimes or very very often wake up in the morning and feel like the luckiest guy in the world because I got to live my dream, which lots of kids when they're growing up want to be professional footballers. And of course, to do that for nearly 20 years, it was so amazing for people to keep saying, can we pay you some money to kick a ball around with your friends? It is pretty cool. And then, of course, when I stopped playing and then I went down this route of keynote speaking and I started delivering speeches for, as you say, the Microsoft, the Cisco's, the Rolls-Royce, KPMG, Invesco, BBC, whoever it is. And now I get paid to talk about kicking a ball around with my friends. So as my mum says, when am I going to get a real job? I said, I'm nearly 50 and I still haven't had one. So I don't think I should change now.
What can business leaders actually learn from football, Paul?
Great question, Christian. Really, really good question. And I suppose what we need to put into context is when I stopped playing, I looked around this world of who was going in and sharing their experience with the corporate leaders. And when I was first advised or recommended to go into keynote speaking, I didn't even know what a keynote speech was. I'd never heard of a keynote speaker, never knew what they did. Of course, once I was informed of this and I really thought this could be something I'd really love to do, I started doing my research as I do, and I started seeing how so many people from such a wide variety of backgrounds were doing it. So you had lots of sporting people, but it was mostly rugby players around England and the UK. There was lots of Olympians did it. Then you started seeing other business leaders who would be delivering these speeches, military personnel, academics, people who had done amazing things like climb Mount Everest or rowed across the Atlantic Ocean. And yet the number one sport, and certainly in the UK, the number one sport statistically in the world is football. And no one from my background had ever become a keynote speaker. And I just thought, very strange, and still to this day, I don't know any other keynote speakers from my background. And I just thought it's very strange, but I clearly thought there was a gap in the market for someone like me. And ultimately what I do when I go in to speak for different companies is I share different subjects and it normally follows a career trajectory. So if you think, for me to walk into a Premier League dressing room without bigging myself up or being too big-headed, I have to be one of the best performers in the world. And I alluded to it when I grew up in Belfast. The thousands of kids, hundreds of thousands of kids around the UK who wanted to be a professional footballer growing up. Then you put that across people like me. I didn't want to be a professional footballer in Ireland. I wanted to be a professional footballer in the greatest league in the world. And I know you're German, so you might dispute the Bundesliga might be equally as good. But in terms of the riches and how much money was available, the Premier League stands by itself. So everybody's trying to get to the pinnacle, which is the Premier League. So for me to walk into a Premier League dressing room, for me to score in the Premier League, for me to sustain that career for nearly 20 years, I have to be one of the best performers in the world. So we talk about performance. And then, of course, once you play in front of 50, 60, 70,000 fans, whether it's Old Trafford or Anfield or Stamford Bridge, you then become, especially after, quite a few hundred games, you become one of the leaders in the team. So then you can talk about leadership. But of course, a background in football is all about teamwork. So working with other teams and how you hopefully going to be greater than the sum of its parts, which ultimately those three subjects, performance, leadership and teamwork, is what I talk about. But because when I stopped playing, I really valued that I played in the Premier League and international, but I also felt like I wanted to add an extra layer of credibility to what I could bring to the table. So what I then did was went and studied my master's in psychology, which, whether it was for my own personal satisfaction, but I wanted to be able to have this understanding of this dichotomy of elite performance. It's not just about doing something to the highest level, higher than millions of other people, but it's also understanding the framework and how you can then share that with people so they can do it. And ultimately, what football can teach the business world, or what the business world can learn from football, comes down to this one sentence. How can you deliver world-class performance if you've never been around world-class performers.
As you mentioned, you have to be like a team player. Considering, like, I know you also had to face Ronaldo in some of the games, right? So would you see him as a team player? I would actually not. I don't know if he is, but like watch him on television, right? So it looks like he's not into a team.
He's, for me, is actually the best example of performance and, of course, a team performer. So one of the reasons why I always share the photograph of playing against Cristiano Ronaldo is because whenever I played against him, it was actually when he first signed Manchester United. So to put this into context, because people might think of him now and see the incredible heights, the amazing achievements that he's had in his career. But when I played against him when he was at Manchester United, he was just a young kid with potential. For instance, on the day that we played, he came on sub because he hadn't really established himself in the team. And, to think about the level he got to, whether you're a fan of football or not, pretty much everyone in the world knows it was between Ronaldo and Messi as who was the greatest possibly of all time, but definitely the greatest in the last 20 years. And the reason why I use Ronaldo as the best example is because when I played against him, he wasn't even in the top 10 best players at Manchester United. When I played in 2004, he also, if you think about the Premier League as a whole, he probably wasn't even in the top 100 best players in the Premier League. So my question always is to any audience and corporate audience that I'm speaking in front of is, how does a kid with potential end up becoming either the greatest or the second greatest footballer of all time? And what's interesting is the answers that you receive, because no matter whether you're speaking in front of 100 CEOs, whether you're speaking in front of a software company, a financial services, professional services, doesn't really matter. The same answers come out time and time again, and people believe that Ronaldo got to the very pinnacle of elite sport down to his belief, his dedication, his hard work, his desire to be the best, his discipline, confidence, arrogance, whatever you call it. All of these different facets that allowed him to do it. And I'm listening to these answers and I'm brilliant. Yep, great. I agree. And then I go, okay, let's just stop. Who can take pretty much all of the answers, 99% of the answers that people share is all those ones I just suggested. I said, right, and now where are they all happening? And someone suddenly finally clicks. It was in his head. It's his mindset and psychology. And that's why I just think he's the best example, because he was not the greatest. He was nowhere by any stretch of the imagination a top footballer, but he just got better and better and better. And actually the story goes is that on his first season at Manchester United, he walked into Sir Alex Ferguson's office and sat down and said, "Boss, I want to be the best player in the world. Will you help me?" Now, just to have that desire, that foresight, that goal, that confidence as an 18-year-old kid says everything you need to know about Cristiano Ronaldo.
Right. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, as you always also touched mindset. You spent years of studying mindset, I assume, right? So what kind of mindset do leaders, especially in industries like tech and telco, need to grow today?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. It's when you look at some of the top performers in the corporate world today, a lot of them will be thinking like elite athletes. And this is what's really interesting, because whenever I was coming towards the end of my career, I went and studied my coaching badges with the English FA. And there was a 4-corner model of performance that I think just sums up how this works perfectly in the corporate world. Because in football, to be the best athlete or performer, there's 4-corner model is about you being the best technically, the best tactically or physically, the best psychologically, and then social. So those 4 corners, whether it's technical and tactical in the top left, physical in the bottom left, psychological in the top right, or social in the bottom right. So psychological top right, social bottom right. Now, those 4 areas, whenever you think to be the best player, you have to improve in all across all those areas. But what's fascinating is whenever you get to a certain level, everybody is technically capable of doing the job. Otherwise, they wouldn't walk into a Premier League dressing room. Physically, they have to be supreme athletes. Socially, they have to be able to deal with all the pressures of that professional football brings. But in my experience, and after 30 years of not only playing at the highest level, I now work as a sports psychologist with 3 Premier League teams over the last 15 years. And the single greatest difference that I've learned over 30 years is that the key differentiator between the best and the very top of all of the best players in the world comes down to mindset and psychology. Now, when you put that into the corporate world, if you take, for instance, whether it's a Microsoft, they're getting the best technical people in the world to come in to join the company. Or if you think of a KPMG or a PwC, they're bringing in people who are technically trained. They've got their charterships, they've got their qualifications. So everybody's pretty much at the same level. So my question would be, Christian, why is there a massive difference in performance? And that's when you start to realize that actually it always comes back to the top right, the psychology, the mindset of the individual performer. And that's where you think, well, the best corporate leaders have got the mindset and they've got the technical ability. The people who potentially could get to that level but aren't performing consistently have the technical ability, but they haven't got this growth mindset that is necessary to deliver world-class performance.
Especially in business or B2B, you always hear like growth mindset, right? So, but it also has to be combined with the areas as you just touched, right? So as you mentioned the example of Cristiano Ronaldo, right? So it's.
Well, I think what's really helpful here is if you say, okay, Paul, and this is generally what happens after I'll deliver a keynote, because I feel like sometimes I'm a lawyer almost in a courtroom building a case when I'm on stage in front of a new audience, because they probably won't know me, they probably never heard of me before. The fact that I look like a 14-year-old child even though I'm 47, they're like who is this kid walking out on stage? And then you start showing them photographs of playing against Cristiano Ronaldo. You talk about all of the work you've done, your masters, and suddenly they're like, okay, I'm open, I can listen to this guy, see what he has. And that's where I try and take people on this journey to be able to start to understand, well, what is my story? How did I allow to compete with the best players in the world for nearly 20 years? And considering I'm only 5'6", 1 meter 68, I was never physically the biggest player, and technically I was okay. And I believe that it was down to my mindset and psychology that allowed me to get to that level. Then I talk about, like we've just discussed, Cristiano Ronaldo. Well, how does one of the greatest players get to the pinnacle? And pretty much everybody thinks it's down to his mindset and psychology. I always then give a team example. What happens if you have two teams competing against each other, whether it's, and you'll probably love this one, Christian, what about the 2014 World Cup, the semi-final between Germany and Brazil? And obviously Germany beat Brazil by 7 goals. And you think, well, why does one team outperform the other when you put it against that four-corner model? Is it because the Germans are technically better than the Brazilians? Probably not. Physically, were they better? They're probably very similar. Socially, have they never played in a big game before? All of them play in front of 70,000, 80,000 fans every week. So why did Germany beat Brazil on that day? It all came down to mindset and psychology. So or you could use an example from the last World Cup, the last Men's World Cup, when Argentina, who went on to become the eventual champions and current holders of the World Cup, including Messi and all those other amazing players, lost to Saudi Arabia in the group stages. Well, is that down to their technical, physical, social, or psychology? It's a psychology. So when I'm at that point, I'm like, okay, we're all on the same page. We all probably think it's really important. It's probably the greatest differentiator in elite performance. And then my question is, so how much work are you doing to improve your psychology? And that's suddenly where you see people go, yeah, not a lot. Or some people say, I set some goals for myself. And, you have 1 or 2 people in the room, which is normally 3 out of about 100 people. So at that point, I kind of feel like I'm trying to sell the subject of psychology, not for me, because let's be honest, I've had my career. I've had the 20 years. I've done everything I need to do in the corporate speaking world. This is not going to benefit me. This is about exposing other people to how they can almost unlock the potential, that latent potential in their own careers for whatever they desire. And so if you get people on board, they're like, okay, Paul, I'm with you. I appreciate now just it's the single greatest difference in people. I also realize that I probably should be doing more on it. So what can I do? And I'm like, well, we're not going to do it in one session, which is why now we deliver long-term leadership programs using some of the greatest performers across all of these industries that I mentioned, whether it's sport, business, military, academia, world exploring. So we deliver this under our leadership club so that people can learn from the very best. And that's why I said how can you deliver world-class performance that all these huge companies are expected to do when they've never been exposed to world-class performers? And that's why I want to bring in the Olympic champions, the fighter jet pilots, the global CEOs, the academics who are studying this, so that we can share from the very, very best, rather than a consultancy firm, and I won't name any names, but by consultancy firms who are amazing. They've got great experience and great expertise, but you're still getting someone who's just a consultant who's studied this. They've never run a multi-billion-dollar business. They've never won an Olympic gold medal. They've never been a fighter jet. They've never done all of this. They just know the theory. And that's why we're different, to be able to go and bring in the best of the best who have been there, seen it and done it.
And I know a lot of listeners, they also want to know more about Paul. If you don't mind, we can now jump into the quick fire round, if that's okay. I ask some rapid fire questions and you have to come up with an answer quickly as possible.
Okay.
Ready?
I'm ready.
One footballer you'd want on your business team?
Ronaldo.
Okay.
Even just to show us how he's done it in his business career, because what he's done in his business career is phenomenal. I think possibly if you look at sport, well, sport's probably a different conversation. If you look just at football, you'd probably say it's really only David Beckham and Cristiano Ronaldo that have taken themselves out of the footballing stratosphere and just gone to such a level that is beyond everything. Is probably the reason why Cristiano Ronaldo has the single biggest following on social media, because he just transcends football, sport into every walk of life. And so, of course, the money that his company and he generates every single year and continue to generate is mind-blowing.
If you could bring one football manager into the business world, who would it be and why?
That's a great question.
Jurgen Klopp?
Yeah, well, Jurgen Klopp is exceptional. And again, he seems to be very, very au fait with how you operate in the corporate world. Now, I don't know if he had any experience or much experience outside of football. I know he's currently working with Red Bull and doing the work since he stopped being a manager. So he would probably be a great example. And I'd maybe use whether it's Jurgen Klopp, because he just seems to be all about the people. Of course, he has to have the technical skills, but his people skills and man management seem to be exceptional. But I would also put someone like Gareth Southgate, who was the England manager, in that category, where there's probably no coincidence that the two people that I think would be the greatest leaders in business are two of the best man managers that I've seen.
Yeah, especially the trainer for England, right? So I know on the beginning, people were not always into him, right? So, and then afterwards it turned around. So this was really interesting to see.
Yeah, and that's probably down to your results. It's when you see in the corporate world, someone who maybe hasn't had the track record to come in and run a business gets an opportunity. So maybe just because you don't have the experience doesn't mean you're capable of doing it. But of course, Gareth Southgate's taken in a whole different operating system into the coach's world, because he's been a top player. He has the confidence and the belief, all of the things, the work ethic, the desire, the problem solving, the people management, the bringing all the pieces of your team together. He's done all that in his footballing career. And of course, that's how he transferred that, and probably been one of the best examples of transferring that into his coaching career.
What's one piece of advice from a coach or teammate that has stuck with you for life?
Can I give you the story? And it's interesting because it wasn't a piece of advice. Although the player was giving me advice, I took it to mean the opposite for me. So I'll give you the context. So as I said, I started in Tottenham Hotspur in 1994, and we had these amazing players, world-class players like Jurgen Klinsmann, Sol Campbell, Teddy Sheringham, Darren Anderton, Nicky Barnby, all these amazing players. And I remember standing as a young kid, 16, 17-year-old kid, in the physio room, which is the hub of the training ground. Everybody goes into the physio room to have a little bit of conversation, a bit of a laugh before you go out training. So as I'm standing in there waiting for the physio to do my strappings on my ankles or whatever I needed, I would hear the first team players, these international players, just talking about things. And then one of them would turn around to me and say, "Paul, play as long as you can. Your playing days are the best days of your life. You'll miss it when you're gone. You're a long time retired. Now, what was interesting was I started in professional football and I didn't realize, Christian, I look back now and know that I did have it, but I had an inferiority complex. I always felt that I wasn't good enough, and it probably made it worse when I met Jurgen on my first day, because I probably looked at Jurgen and thought, if that's what it takes to be a professional footballer, a Premier League footballer, an international footballer, which were all of the things that I wanted to be, then there's no way I'm ever going to get to that level, because Jurgen Klinsmann is the benchmark. But within a year, I'd already started to read a book and started to educate myself in this world of personal development and how we grow and growth mindset and how to, improve your life. And as I read this book, it was by a guy called Tony Robbins, who's a big American personal development guru. And because they were talking about things like your beliefs, how you pick them up, how you adopt them, how they run your life and your belief system. And I was listening to these senior players tell me, Paul, play as long as you can. The playing day is the best day of your life. And I started to think, what a terrible belief that would be. As a 17-year-old kid at the start of my career, I thought, well, if I do choose to adopt that belief into my life, I didn't know whether I would get a professional contract. I didn't know whether I'd make it to 25 in football, 30. If you're lucky, you get to 35 before you can officially retire. I managed to get to 32 before I choose to step away from football. But I thought, well, you're still a young man. And essentially what that means is the rest of your life is downhill. I thought, well, what a terrible thing to believe. So I thought, I'm not going to do that. And because I then started on this journey of realizing that football is just one part of my life, and my whole identity isn't wrapped up in what I do for a living. And even though it's very easy to think that you're just a professional footballer, and without going into too much of a psychological context, but essentially that's an extrinsic event. I can't control being a professional footballer. Someone has to offer me a contract and then I can sign it. I could put myself in the best position to do it, but I can't control it. And so if my entire identity is based on something that's outside of my control, you can see why people really struggle with that. And so it's probably the same with people who are lawyers or accountants or work at a company for 20 years. You can see how their entire identity is wrapped up in their job, but you're so much more than that. And so whenever I realized when I stepped away from football at 32, and it was the best decision ever made. And then, of course, you then have the challenge of what do you do when you stop playing football, which is why I feel so fortunate to have got into the keynote speaking world and travel around the world, speaking to companies all of the time. And actually then you have the challenge of, well, would I ever earn as much money as I earned in the Premier League? And of course, that's just a limiting belief that I'm placing on me. No one's ever told me that. That's just something that I thought, adopted. But actually, that's not helpful either. So now I need to challenge that all the time. And very fortunately, in the last number of years, we then broke through the highest money I'd ever earned outside of the Premier League. And then last year, we doubled it again, which just shows the opportunities that are out there if you choose to go for them.
The morning routine. How do you stay fit?
As a 47-year-old man?
Yep.
Train hard. Is there another way? If you can tell me another way, then I'd love to know, Christian. I run, I lift weights, I play football, I do yoga, I do lots of things that keep me in shape. But also, people might listen to this and go, oh, it's okay for you, Paul, you're an athlete. And yes, in my head, I still identify as an athlete. That's something that I have carried with me, but I haven't always been in shape as a professional athlete. So even in the last 15 years when I wasn't being paid to be an athlete, I still wanted to be in shape and fit and lean and strong. But I can imagine there'll be people listening to this going, yeah, but I don't have time to do it. Or I've got a kids, or I've got a job, or I've got a travel schedule, or I've got all these things. And of course, lots of people have those challenges and I appreciate them. I understand, I empathize with them. And it was interesting last year when I was at a period in my life where I was getting quite frustrated that I wasn't in the shape that I wanted to be. And so I decided to stop drinking alcohol. But again, didn't think I was particularly drinking a lot of alcohol, but I thought it's not helping, so I'm going to stop. And so I stopped drinking in June last year. And then on top of stopping drinking, I then thought, well, actually, it might be quite helpful. And I know all the research about fasting and it can be really beneficial for fasting. So I now do a 36-hour fast 1 day a week. So I'll have all my food over the weekend, stop eating Sunday evening, get up on Monday morning, go training, get into work by 9, work 9 to 5, do what I need to do after work, and then get into bed by about 9:30, and then wake up Tuesday and then eat on the Tuesday morning. So don't eat all of Monday. And those two things combined have allowed me to lose 10 kilos over the 9 months. And that's where I think there's no excuse. When people go, I'm too busy, I can't do this, I don't have the money, I've got too busy a schedule. Well, actually, those two things they cost you nothing, and you don't have to do anything. There's actually no excuse. So if you say, no, I'm not going to have a drink, and no, I'm not going to eat 1 day a week, actually can give you a huge, huge boost in your health and your fitness by doing nothing. You don't have to do anything. So it doesn't add to your to-do list. It actually takes away from it. And of course, will save you money as well. Again, everybody's different, and there's something to be said for having a drink with your friends, if that's what you like to do or that's what you choose to do. I would just say that by not drinking over the last nearly 12 months of my life, and by fasting 1 day a week, it has completely transformed my health and fitness, and I haven't had to do anything extra.
Paul, the tech and telco industries are fast moving and constantly going forward with new ideas. How do we take these football learnings and your personal learnings as a keynote speaker to apply them to business?
Yeah, so interesting. So we're just securing some investment from the US at the minute for our businesses, which is a really interesting process. And I'm going through speaking to lots of people around that. And actually, one of the things we were talking about with one of the investors last week is how they've invested in so many, in private equity. So they've invested in so many companies, and it's not the money that they invest that is the difference, whether that company is successful or not. It's the people who are running it. So when you talk about fast changing and fast, moving industries like the tech industry, you can have the best technology in the world, but if you don't have the people who are open to learning and improving and getting better and working hard and wanting to be the best and the dedication and all of the things we talked about around Cristiano Ronaldo, you can have the best product in the world, but your company isn't going to be successful if your people don't have the right mindset. So that's why I think it's hugely important to get the people in who are more interested in improving as people than improving the technology, because ultimately it doesn't matter how good the technology is if you don't have the people there to utilize it. The second part of that is, I would say, it's really down to people's attitude to change. And if you don't understand that there are actually 3 pillars when it comes to change, because society is changing and technology is changing, there's so many things that are changing all the time, that when you realize this process of change has 3 pillars, and the first one we generally have is opposition. So I'll give an example. When I was 17, 18-year-old, I was phoning home every weekend to speak to my parents, and my mum suggested one weekend I was speaking to her that I should try yoga and start doing yoga on a daily basis. And I didn't really think it was for me, but eventually she convinced me, so I started doing yoga. I don't know if you remember, Christian, although I know you're the same age as me, so you'll probably remember those video cassettes, but some of our younger listeners might not know what a video cassette is. That's but like streaming on YouTube. Anyway, so I was watching a yoga video every day, doing the yoga before I go into training while I was at Tottenham Hotspur. But then, of course, I moved to Norwich City in 2000. And then once I established myself in the team, I was playing every week, scoring goals. Felt like it was a really big part of the team. And then I thought, right, I feel brave enough or confident enough to bring my yoga mat into the training ground at Norwich City. And you can only imagine what happened when I brought that yoga mat in front of 25 football players. And we ended up that I'd go into training, I'd do my yoga to the side of the physio room. I used to get so much abuse, whether it was verbal, physical, people throwing socks at me, water at me, just because I'm doing some stretching. Unbelievable. Anyway, over the days it happened, I then put my yoga mat back in my locker, and the lads would go in, take my yoga mat and cut it up into 1,000 pieces. Now, of course, I wasn't happy, Christian, so I thought, well, And the more you get to know me, you realize I'm a stubborn little so-and-so. So I went and bought another yoga mat, and I brought it in the second day. This time I did the yoga. It's got the same amount of abuse. Tried to hide the yoga mat. I tried to be quite sneaky. They found the yoga mat. They put it into one of those metal bins and set it on fire. I wasn't happy, so I went and got it and bought another yoga mat for the third day until eventually they brought it into the car park. They drove over it. They destroyed it. By the fourth day, I think they just got bored, to be honest. Until eventually the people who were coming in stopped coming in, and one of the older players just poked his head round the corner and said, "Paul, what are you doing?" I went, "I'm just doing some stretching." I said, "Why? You're going to do that in the warm-up?" And I said, "I know, but I'd rather go out feeling 100% rather than 80% and do the warm-up to get the 100%. Anyway, this then helped me understand the process of change, where I went from that first pillar, which is opposition. People just don't like change. They'll oppose it. They'll just say, no, it's not for me. Until I realized once he poked his head around the corner and said, "What are you doing?" He was curious. He was asking questions. Why should you change? Why should we do it differently than what we've done before? And of course, Christian, you can see my face smiling. I look a little bit smug, although people here listening won't see my face, but hopefully they can hear it in my voice, that eventually we got to the third pillar. And that's, of course, what happened over the next 6, 7, 8 weeks. We got to the third pillar, which is acceptance, until eventually I had 5 or 6 players coming in and joining me for yoga every morning because they felt it would benefit them. And of course, that's what happens in this process of change. When you talk about what can the business world learn from that, well, actually, anytime any senior leaders try and incorporate any kind of change, most people will be like, "Nope, don't want to do it. It's not for me. I don't want to use that system. I don't want to use Teams. I don't want to have that monthly meeting. I don't want to have this. I don't think we need to do..." All of the opposition, until eventually you realize that people who are going, "Well, what's the benefits?" I've already moved to the second pillar, until the ones who are really fast learning, the ones who know what direction the world's going in, are already at the third pillar of, "That's what's happening. Great. I'm on board. Let's go."
I know people are nowadays like health and doing yoga. This is more being common, right? So more people are doing this, which is good. What I just don't see so much, which industry B2B especially can learn from football, because you guys have dedicated coaches, right? So I know, like, if you take Tech and Telco again, it's all about data. While you look within football, they do all the analysis, right? So checking the competition, what kind of move did somebody do? How can you get better? Sometimes I miss reflecting myself, right? So working within a team, within a project, within sales, you always have to, reflect yourself, right? And this is also where a lot of people and listeners can learn from yourself, as you got all the experience, saying, look, how can you act as a coach, right? Can you talk a little bit about this? Like, how can companies potentially benefit if they work together with you?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share this, and it's not for me to say that you should work with us. Probably what I will share is what we do, and then that might align or resonate with some people. But ultimately, the way for us to work with, normally it's senior leadership teams across the world, is for us to be able to go, well, first of all, I'll go back to that initial question I said earlier in the podcast, which is, how can you expect to deliver world-class performance if you've never been around world-class performers? Because if you think you're working hard, it's all relative. Or if you think you're a good performer, it's all relative. And let's just take running, for example. It's outside the corporate world, but it just gives me an example. If you think I go running every weekend or 2-3 times a week, I think I'm a good runner. I'm running 7 30-minute miles or 7-minute miles or 6 30-minute miles, whatever speed you're running at. You think, well, that's really good. And you're probably faster than lots of people. But who are you comparing yourself to? Are you comparing yourself to other people around you? Or are you comparing yourself to the best in the world at what you're doing? And that's where I think that whenever we come in from the professional sport, whether it's football, Olympians, whatever sport you're talking about people who have been at the pinnacle of an unbelievably competitive. I would actually say professional football is the most competitive because of the millions and billions of people who've wanted to do it around the world, and only a few can get to the absolute pinnacle of that industry. And so you're saying, well, how do those people operate? What language do they use? How do they talk to themselves when things go well? How do they talk to themselves when things don't go according to plan? How do you strategize? How do you work as a team? What's your attitude to being coached? What's your problem solving ability like? How can you work together in a team, even if you don't necessarily like the person? You still need to achieve the end goal. So all of these facets of how you perform at the highest level is all relative. So what we do is we have to have some sort of benchmark. We have to measure, whether that's through psychometrics, whether it's through KPIs, whether it's through sales turnover, P&L, whatever it is, we have to have the benchmark to be able to measure. So our framework that we work with our academics to be able to create we call it the 5 E's, just to keep it simple from a marketing perspective. And that's, we need to understand where we are from the very start. Okay, so that's the first part. What's the start of this? Once we understand where we're going, okay, then we need to engage people. Okay, so once we understand we've got a big audience or a very senior audience, how do you engage some of the people who have been in the corporate world for 20, 25, 30 years? They've seen a lot, they've been around, they've seen lots of people. But let me tell you, Christian, when you bring in a World Cup winner or an Olympic gold medalist or a fighter jet pilot or someone who's climbed Everest, no matter what your background is, that's impressive. And this world-class roster of elite performers and experts that we have can engage pretty much anyone. And then, of course, we need to educate people into a new way of doing it. This is what you've done before and it's great. It's got you to this point. But how do we actually start improving and doing it in a slightly different way using our world-class experience? And then, of course, the amount of times that I've done a session and whether it's a keynote and the amount of people said, how do we embed this in our culture? And I'm saying, well, the only way to embed it is if we do continuous ongoing training and development. And of course, the last E is around empowering people. We have to understand how can we use our executive coaches to be able to help people specifically for their situation that they're in. So that entire framework allows us to work continuously with clients and companies and SLTs, because even if we delivered an 18-month program using a fighter jet pilot and our academics and some of our world explorers, well, in the next program, on the next 12 months or 18 months, we can use a global CEO or a professional football player or whoever it is. So because our roster is so big of the people we work with and they're all coming in. And ultimately what I think is there's no one right way to world-class performance, because all the people we work with have all got to that level, just either in a different industry or through a different technique.
Paul, this has been an incredible conversation. So many insights, not just for leaders in tech and telco, but for anyone looking to raise their game. Where can people find you if they want to connect or learn more?
Yeah, so probably the easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn. Obviously, just my name, Paul McVeigh, McVeigh. If you're on Instagram or on X, Twitter, then it's just Paul McVeigh 77. And of course, my website is just paulmcveigh.com if you want to go and check it out. But LinkedIn is probably the easiest way. It's probably my biggest network, my biggest way of connecting and engaging with the people who I work with. And yeah, that's always been the way that I like to connect with everybody who wants to come and say hello.
Right, so we will make sure we will put all those informations also in the show notes so people can find all those informations. Thanks again, Paul, for sharing your knowledge and experience. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and stay tuned for more conversations to come. Connecting for Future. See you next time.